Thanks for joining us today, and we're thrilled to be able to welcome you to Responsible Disruption and our 7th Innovation Table Zoomcast. My name is Monique Blau, and I'm the Director of Strategy and Design in the lab and at J5, a Calgary-based innovation design firm. And I'm going to be your host today for Responsible Disruption. I'm delighted to welcome our guests as we explore adaptation and adoption. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we're currently gathered on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. The traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mokinttis, which we now call the city of Calgary. This traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as Treaty 7 territory, which includes Kainai, Siksika, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda nations. We would like to recognize the Métis people and the Inuit people who have made their home here in Calgary. Next, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. We are recording the session today, so if you'd like to share it with your colleagues or friends, we will email you with a follow-up link in the next couple of days. And the recording is also held on our YouTube channel. Our next Innovation Table episode is next Wednesday on May 27th, and we'll be hosting part 2 of our virtual talking circle and the Indigenous perspective on the COVID-19 health crisis. Our agenda today, we have some introductions, wonderful conversation with our 3 guests. We'll also be opening audience questions and then a quick recap. If you'd like to ask a question along the way, you can do so by clicking the QA button in the bottom of your Zoom panel, and we'll be collecting them throughout the Zoomcast today. Our social systems are being disrupted, and there's constant demand for new ideas, solutions, products, and services. And that demand continues to outpace the supply for funding and services. And we in the Social Impact Lab, a partnership between J5 and the United Way of Calgary and area, are responding to this disruption by investing in innovation, which we are calling responsible disruption, ensuring that change that results is considered fair to Calgarians and communities. Our Zoomcast, Responsible Disruption, is a series of discussions with leading players in social innovation sector and beyond. And the discussions are about communities, the systems, the role of the individual in this change. And I'm really excited today to welcome our 3 guests who are leaders in the space of innovation. So I'm going to jump into introducing them right away. I'll begin with you, James, who is usually my co-host here on Responsible Disruption. James is the Director of Innovation at the United Way Calgary and area and the Social Impact Lab. He started his role at the United Way in March 2020, following a 20-year career leading innovation teams in the private sector. He worked in the UK, Europe, and in Canada for RBS, Aviva, and ATB. James came to Canada in 2011 to work for ATB and had the privilege of leading the Emerge Innovation team, which was responsible for transformation and truly moving ATB to being an innovative digital business. Our next guest is Beth Gignac. Beth has a career of being an entrepreneur, working in municipal government and the not-for-profit sectors for over 20 years. She is passionate about the world of possibilities, to build better communities. And to paraphrase Lewis Carroll, she often has 6 impossible ideas before breakfast. That is true. As the Chief Operating Officer of United Way Calgary and area, she has led the development of the innovation portfolio and the Social Impact Lab, which we will soon be scaling across the United Way movement in Canada. And our final guest for today is Patrick Mills. Patrick is United Way of Greater Chattanooga's Director of Social Innovation. He's held multiple roles in the social sector, but his current role is really about accelerating community impact. Patrick helps to convene cross-sector project teams in order to support, guide, collaborative efforts that address complex challenges that the residents in his community face. Welcome all 3 of you, and thank you for joining us today. So just a reminder to our audience, this is interactive. So as you have a question, jump into the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom panel, and we will get to them throughout today's session. So I'd like to kick this off with you, Patrick, as a guest on the other side of the border. We're really curious in understanding what Chattanooga is facing since the lockdown. How have you seen your community shift? And I know you've had some challenges even with the weather recently, a horrible tornado that also impacted your community. So maybe you could share with us what you've seen shift and how the agencies in your neighborhood are supporting your community.
Sure. Thank you for hosting, and I'm really happy to be joining this great team doing some amazing work. They served as a great inspiration for us as we launched our social innovation efforts and continue to really develop them and iterate on all those things as well. So I also appreciate the introduction when you guys were talking about the Native Americans, indigenous people groups that are in your area. For those of you who don't know, Chattanooga is in the southeast corner of Tennessee, which is home to, or used to be home to, the Cherokee Indians, and really was the starting point, sadly, of the great tears. For those of you who know sort of the historical background of that. So there's a lot of influence of Native American culture that is found throughout our region, especially a lot of the naming conventions as well. So really appreciated that, just that influence and aspect that you guys mentioned as well. So as Monique mentioned to you in my introduction here, our community, like everybody else across the world, is facing this pandemic and this crisis. But to escalate that on April 12th, so that is the evening of April 12th, which was Easter Sunday, we had a series of tornadoes rip through our community and just devastated huge segments of pretty much our entire eastern side of our region was devastated with massive destruction. And that just escalated our calls. From just sheer numbers and data points, our 211 center, which is our basic needs operations center unit of our United Way, which it is the case for many United Ways across the world, had a 500% increase once COVID hit. And then we started to taper off just barely, slightly, and that's when the tornado hit, and it kind of escalated even more. So to the point where we had maybe 3-hour wait times for the calls, people needing basic needs, and we ended up having to do a quick onboarding process for several community volunteers who came through our corporate sector, who just stood up and say, hey, we're going to pay some of our staff members to come and help you out, just to answer some of these calls, be a triage, and at least have a voice that people can speak to, which I think was really, really important, especially amidst kind of both of these crises happening at the same time. But I will say this, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of crisis, comes great innovation, and that's something that we definitely have seen across our community as well. As just the initial reaction of our communities all coming together and to quickly respond in the way that we did. It's been really beautiful to watch, and so we're still in that midst now. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue in today's webinar.
Thanks, Patrick. It's great to see communities step up to respond to a situation when there's a shortage of resources. Beth, how about over to you? Could you share what we're seeing in our city, Calgary, but also maybe speak directly to some of the needs that we've seen and what's changed?
Yeah, I mean, Alberta is not only dealing with this pandemic, but is also dealing with, and has been dealing with, economic turbulence for some time. And, we were living in 2020 with that reality when this health crisis hit our community. And already our 211 distress center lines were receiving increased calls from people dealing with anxiety due to financial pressures. We'd already seen increases, unfortunately, in domestic and family violence. And we were already, on that pathway. And when the health crisis hit, like Patrick's community, those calls into our distress center, just were outrageous in terms of numbers and volume and issues and concerns that people had. And, shout out here to Jerry Lynn Dressler and our team at the Distress Center in Calgary and the 211 team. They quickly mobilized and transitioned their entire operations virtually within 48 hours to become a virtual operation. And people were working the call centers from their homes. And many, many organizations had to make that very similar pivot to begin to provide services in a completely different way. So we saw that all across our community. People redesigning programs, redesigning efforts, redesigning community kitchens, redesigning food service delivery programs, redesigning shelters. All of this was happening at a very, very rapid pace. And people were really working together and really leaning into that work together to take care of people who needed help. And, you know, our community, we like to say, is really special when it comes to that. You know, Calgarians lean into that. We lean into it really well. You know, we all know that we're in it together. And this crisis, I think, once again demonstrated that Calgarians can do that. Within our own organization, we made similar kinds of pivots, including programs at the lab. You know, Monique, your programs, you turn them over, you and James, within a week. We were running virtual consultations and engagement, already helping agencies within the first week or two to actually redesign business models like SNAP when things were all of a sudden, you know, we need to make some hard pivots here. What do we do? Our team at the Social Impact Lab stepped into that space. Our team here managed to create and stand up a COVID community response fund within 72 hours. And within 5 days, we were already actually getting money out the door to agencies. So that includes, you know, all of the building of the fund from the website, but also building up an application process, building up you know, what are we going to fund, going through all these things, finding partners. Gracious philanthropists in our community started to come together. And, you know, we've so far been able to distribute $4 million to 133 agencies in the past 9 weeks. And that is a tremendous accomplishment. And so, you know, I'm really proud to be a member of this community. And there's been a lot of work, a lot of really hard work. A lot of people aren't sleeping. You know, just pounding it out there and really getting it done to ensure that people don't fall through the cracks in our systems. Because the other thing that I will say is that our systems have been failing and individuals have been resilient. But I'm not so sure that our systems have demonstrated resilience.
Thanks, Beth, for that. You know, certainly our province has suffered a lot, like many others, our city in particular, around economic turbulence, but really being able to adapt and quickly redesign speaks to the testament of the hard work that individuals are bringing. James, I'd be really interested in bringing you into this conversation. Although new to the sector, you're definitely not new to innovation, to adapting and change. You know, for our audience, what would you share with them from your experience around what's needed in order to be able to adapt and what creates this desire to adapt?
Yeah, thank you, Monique. And first off, it's great to be the other side of the desk, so to speak, not answering the questions, not asking them. It's a different perspective on the event this afternoon. So thank you very much for that. So first off, I think, you know, the way I would summarize my view on the future is I'm quite optimistic at times like this. You know, I think profound change and seismic change that we've seen is a good opportunity to create something better. You know, I'm thinking about the modern welfare state came out of the impact of the Depression and the Second World War. You know, I think about where we can apply creativity to the problems that face us and the opportunities that are there to make things better. So thinking about, you know, what's going on in the city at the moment, you know, as Beth says, in the social sector, there's been loads of innovation in the last few weeks on the hoof, and it's been incredibly impressive. You know, we've seen organizations like the Leftovers Foundation pivoting from just redistributing food from bakeries and grocery stores to leftover restaurant food at the start of the crisis. Recently, we've seen Rouge Restaurant using their kitchens to create packed lunches for youths and children. You know, in the private sector in Calgary, we've seen, you know, from organizations like Local Laundry, the hoodie, the COVID-19 hoodie, from which all the proceeds went to the relief fund, and Minhas breweries, pivoting to creating hand sanitizer and proof and vine art, both changing their value proposition. So we've seen lots of innovation in the sector in the last few weeks, and I'm hopeful that will carry forward. The reality is, that even when we go back to work in a few weeks' time, it'll be quite different. We're likely to be going through peaks and troughs. We might have future lockdowns. And it's going to be really important for our organizations and the businesses in this city to be nimble, agile and adaptable to what's in front of them. And, that comes from a positive mindset. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about mindset, but, open and agile innovation practices as well within their organizations. So, I'm really optimistic about the future. So unpacking what adaptability really means. From an individual point of view, it's a positive mindset. We'll talk about that in a moment, but a positive mindset is all important. Persistence and resilience. At times like this, you need to be able to roll with the punches a little bit. You need to be able to try things and not be too knocked when they don't work and learn from them. You need to be really resourceful, creative, and bring creativity to your problem solving. Bring curiosity as well, open-mindedness. So those individual behaviors are like really, really important. And, bring that into how you work, learning and adapting to what you see in front of you. Experimentation is very important, as is collaboration and critical thinking. So those are individual behaviors, but actually, I think if, from a leadership point of view, if the organizations in this community adopt a real adaptable leadership model, there's great hope for the future. And that's thinking about, leaders being willing to pivot quickly, respond to what's thrown at them, respond to the circumstances they see in the future, increase their speed of response, do stuff and see what the result is. And the importance of agility in their leadership and empowering their teams to try and find answers and solutions to the problems. I think the old style leadership model of a leader having all the answers and the team actually implementing them, those are long gone. I love the phrase, thick playbooks make for thick players. Mm-hmm. What we need is empowering leadership to be able to actually solve some of these complicated problems. And lastly, it's a little bit, when we're all running around very quickly, having a loose and devolved decision-making and loose hierarchy in organizations is really important. So decision-making is sharp and nimble, and we're able to get things done quickly. So I think, in answer to the question, I'm pretty optimistic about the future, but what it does, it relies on individuals and leaders really in the social sector and in the business sector in Calgary to really adopt some of those adaptable traits and make things better in the future.
Thanks, James. That's great. I'd actually like to turn it over to Beth too, because I'm curious, from what James is sharing, we have these individual traits and characteristics, and there's also the role of the leader within organizations. Yourself, Beth, you're a leader. We all are, but as Chief Operating Officer, and we're also working from home, so you don't have the opportunity to connect with your team all the time. How are you creating this space so that your team can be more creative, so they can be adaptive, and also know that maybe this decentralized decision making exists in your world?
Yeah, it's I guess a couple of things that I find a little disconcerting. I have a management by walking around. You've heard that terminology. I mean, I just call it a restless, curious mind that's accompanied by an equally restless physical self. And I learn and like to think that I'm a bit of a bumblebee in terms of cross-pollinating ideas. In fact, it's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. And I do feel disconnected from the teams. And I'm disconnected from learning. And while I'm, some of these tools that we're using, like Zoom or like Microsoft Teams or, Mural or whatever all these digital platforms are, they're great, but we've had to, learn how to use them and learn how to be conversant and fluid and fluent in them in a very compressed period of time. So I'm not so sure that I'm being a great leader right now, and I'm not so sure that I really understand where people may have great ideas that I don't know about, and I'm really struggling to try to figure out how to get to them. I've been asking people to reach out, and I've been trying to reach out to the best of my ability to do so. But to be perfectly honest, I mean, the first 6 weeks of this particular crisis, I didn't have a lot of bandwidth, just always involved in emergency response. And I know, Patrick, you and I have talked about that, and I think you were very similarly in a very similar place. So I really feel it's only been in the last couple of weeks that I've been able to lift my head up and give myself 10 or 15% bandwidth in my own daily life to be able to start to reach out to people and connect with people differently. I'm making a huge assumption that people are doing what they know needs to be done because we've got great people in place. And when I think about the practices that you need to have made, the things that you need to have done, I think that we made a lot of good decisions, frankly, in the last couple of years that have allowed us to actually be in a place of resiliency right now. And one of them has been to hire great people and to really, recruit people who have different kinds of skills, discovery, thinking skill sets, to be good companions to delivery skill sets, which we had here in spades when I arrived a few years ago. I think that one of the other things that we've also been doing over the past couple of years is we've been providing practice space. So we've been doing, sprints, 30, 60, 90-day sprints to try to solve internal business problems. We started that practice a couple of years ago. And I'm finding that kind of thinking, I'm seeing more of that kind of thinking now. And certainly many of the quick pivots that we've had to make, or some of the things we've been asked to consult on, I think that people are feeling confident in that consultation process because we've been doing this sprint-based approach and bringing that agile thinking into our organization over the past couple of years. This innovation has been a muscle that, Monique, more than anyone probably, that because you've been leading much of it with us, it's a muscle that we've had to train up. And I feel that our commitment to that over the past couple of years has created a team of folks in the organization who are able to move quite confidently in these, really nimble times. So that's been really interesting. And I think that the last thing is that, we formalized this process, just like you have, Patrick, in Chattanooga, we formalized this. We have an innovation team. We acknowledge that it's a core muscle. We're acknowledging that this is something that we need to not only lean into, but to have formalized within our organization. So I think those are some of the practical things that we've done as an organization in the last couple of years that have put us, I think, in a really good position. I would say that the thing that I am trying to hold in my own mind is to continue to push myself. So be courageous in the face of uncertainty. Trust that you or someone else on your team knows what needs to be known to get it about right. And, I'm going to quote, I am going to do this. I'm going to quote the great Stompin' Tom. And this is actually something, I know everyone's laughing. For those of you who are watching south of the border, Stompin' Tom Connors is a legend in the Canadian music industry. And this is actually something that I have on my wall in the office. If you don't get at it when you get to it, you won't get to it to get at it again. Just think about that for a minute. But what that means is it's happening, it's live, it's in front of you, you know what you need to know. If you don't, go and find somebody who does and just do it. And I think that these kinds of times require us to be able to be courageous and to act and to believe in who we are and to know that we've got the stepping stones in place. Or if we don't have them in place, call somebody who will help you put them in place. So I think that's kind of where I'm at from a leadership perspective. And, I think it's really important to make sure that you're bringing your whole self into that. Into this environment. I mean, I do that all day, every day, or I try to, but, try to say, recognize and acknowledge if I'm having a hard time or I don't understand or I don't know. Sometimes I'm cranky and I just call it and say, hey, this is who I am and how I'm feeling right now. And this is what we need to get through. And, some of my colleagues have heard that from me more often than others, and I thank you for that. But I think it's really important to just be honest with yourself and who you are. And these digital platforms, you lose something. So I'm trying to be more verbal about that. Trying to use, as my partner Denise would say, I'm using my words more frequently.
That's great. I love this concept, and I completely agree that innovation is a muscle we need to train. And I'm interested, Patrick, in the work that you're doing south of the border through Venture Forward and the organizations that you work with, and specifically in the social sector. How do you tell individuals to train that muscle when they don't really understand even what the first step might be?
Well, I think both James and Beth hit on that a little bit. How do you train a muscle if they don't even know what muscles to use? I think the essence of, I think just crises in general. I think James kind of led into this about this analogy of this door, right? Crises have these, are opportunities, really. I mean, while they're not fun and they're ugly and they're painful at times, they also provide a door upon which we can enter into and really consider opportunities to look at creative solutions. But what it takes, though, is for people who are resilient to walk through the door, to actually not just open the door and peek in, but to open the door and step forward. And sometimes that first step forward is quite a hard process, because many times, especially in the midst of chaos and a crisis, you have no idea what's on the other side of the threshold. And so to walk into that takes courage. And so for me, I think any type of innovation in response to crisis takes courage, and it also takes transparency to this opportunity for you to say, I don't know what is across the threshold, and I am scared, but I'm fearful, but I am going to take that step because there's so much potential for there to be a great creative solution that could come out of it if I just make the effort to take a couple steps forward. And so I think encouraging people to continue to do that over and over and over again is something that's really good. For our local capacity in the midst of this, our United Way is serving as the sort of hub for all response efforts, especially around the social impact side of things. And our particular team are the ones who are sort of coordinating things and then sort of challenging people to get kind of more into more formal focus groups, depending on whatever focus areas that they're engaged in, and then to start to look at potentially innovative ways to explore them as well. And I'd say for today, we sent out this email of encouragement. I was listening to a devotion this morning, and it kind of came at just the right timing. This devotion had to do with crises that happened in our life, and the person who was speaking, the speaker, kind of gave this analogy to a married couple, and this of a wife who has just frustrated with her husband for his complacency. And for us in our particular case, our community was in a complacent response effort kind of mentality as we were approaching social sector and social impact work up until COVID hit. And now we have this crisis. And in a marriage, in that sort of situation, a crisis, a wife comes to her husband and says, look, if you don't shape up, I'm going to leave you. Well, that's a heightened crisis. Now he's going to respond with this heightened crisis with some type of reaction. And if he chooses the reaction to look at, okay, well, how can I build upon my wife? How can I build her and encourage her up? And how can I build our marriage and our family unit in a much stronger way and take a positive approach to that crisis? Then it'll result in real positive movement. Of course, he has another choice. He could not make any changes whatsoever, and he can continue to be complacent. Well, this crisis right now, this COVID and tornado crisis in our particular case, presents a heightened awareness to a state that we're going through. And what are we going to do? And I think for us, we have to kind of keep that fire going about, hey, this, and then typically, let's say that a husband was to respond great, but over time things start to settle down. And as they settle down, we end up drifting back into our kind of normal routines. So the encouragement I sent out to our task force, our group of organizational leaders at 180, 200 members strong, is just to say, resist the drift, resist us going back to the way and the complacent way that we were approaching. And remember the first 2 weeks of this COVID crisis and how we all had to abandon our presumptuous walls and our big, huge pillars that we stood upon in order to respond to the immediate needs of our community. And I think just those inspirational elements of recognizing the good that kind of came out of it right away was really, really important. So I just wanted to, I think that is, those encouraging moments, that as a leader of innovation, is to come back and just continue to say, keep going, you may not know what's going to happen. It's going to be hard. It's going to be work. But there's a huge light at the end of the tunnel as long as we kind of maintain this response element.
Yeah. Beth, I see your mouth. I wondered if there's something you wanted to share there, because I think there's a lot of great insights.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you're so right, Patrick. Like, the lull of the status quo is profound, and our brains want us to stay there, right? I mean, it's in some cases we're fighting biology. We're fighting our own neocortex. Not to get too sciencey on us all, but that's really what's happening. And but we know that we have a different response that we can make. And there's a question: how can we sustain this? These learnings going forward. And I do think that one of the ways that we sustain it is to make a commitment to ask why, to ask why not, to ask so what, to ask who cares, to say what can I do? Why wouldn't I do that? Why won't I do that? So, how hard are you going to ask yourself, series of questions you can ask yourself. And then secondly, take advantage of institutional formalized frames that have already been established, whether it's Patrick's lab, our lab, whatever's out there, like take advantage of those spaces that are being provided and participate in them. You started this off by saying, Monique, like we are all leaders. Each one of us have the individual capacity to do great things. And we all want to do great things. And most of us do great things all the time, right? So joining up efforts with others in formalized structures is one of the ways that we can actually try to sustain some of this learning, some of this movement, that's happening. Like everybody wants to go back to normal. There's no normal. What is normal? Was normal ever? What were we thinking? Is it normal? Is it normal that people should be hungry? Is that normal? What are the kinds of normals that you really want to have? What is it going to say about who we are as a society and who we are as a culture if we say we want to go back to normal where people are hungry? We want to go back to a normal when people who are sick are on the street. We want to go back to a normal that seems to me to be very abnormal. So, I think that there are formal constructs and structures in place that in our community and in other communities, we're going to start convening. We're going to be doing this digital. There's going to be lots of opportunities in what we're going to call the reimagining phase of recovery. To allow us to capture these good ideas, to capture these good practices, to capture these good innovations, to capture this good energy, and to allow people to participate in that co-design and in that redesign process. So I think that taking advantage of those formal structures and those formal invitations is one of the ways that we can actually sustain that practice, right? So if one piece of the puzzle is redesigned and the rest of the puzzle is not redesigned, this puzzle piece just stands alone. So, I really feel that there has to be that kind of, formalization. And like we're talking about today, we do have some of those formal structures in place. And, you better bet that we're going to be leaning into it.
Yeah. I think the formalization of structures, the support network around the city, both in Chattanooga and here, to support organizations and individuals to find ways to be innovative is great. And, leaning into that is key. What I'm curious about is, those organizations or individuals that are sitting back and going, I've got this problem, I don't know where to begin. And how we all face problems is different for each of us. And I'm curious, James, if you could tell us, what would you tell an individual or organization that's facing a particular problem? Where to start?
Yeah, thanks, Monique. So just riffing first off what Beth was saying, that the new normal, I think, is that desire for stability. And, we're all, naturally, we all look for that desire for stability. But the reality is, as we've been discussing for the last half an hour now, is that was there any stability anyway? And actually, those that have survived up to now have been the ones who are adaptable. So thinking about that and thinking about, mindset, where I would start with mindset is, if Patrick talked about courage and being courageous, and we've talked about resilience and persistence, that puts people in a vulnerable position. So in that respect, I would start with self-care. I would start with looking after yourself to make sure that you're comfortable in the situations in which you find yourself. Now, whether you do that by going for a run or playing with the kids or meditating, I would make sure that you're in a good place yourself before addressing this kind of stuff. Secondly, I ensure that your why is aligned with your organizational why. If there's a disconnect there, if you're both trying to do different things, that's a problem. So, alignment of that why. Recently, I've seen this Japanese model, Ikigai, I think it's called, where it is 4 intersecting circles. And the circles, I think, if I get this right, is what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. And the intersection in there is very much the sweet spot. And I've been trying to use that in my own world recently. And again, aligning with what is required in the world and what you're good at is a way of self-care and ensuring that you're performing to your optimal. So I think that's a really important point to start with. It puts you in the right place from a mindset point of view. We talk a lot about growth mindset as well, especially in the innovation space. And, it's easy to be in a fixed mindset. Stability that we've talked about, is a fixed mindset world. But, we need to try and get into a growth mindset. And how do we do that? So first off, I read something really good just this morning, actually, which said, put out of your mind about losing control, because you probably never had it anyway. So, put yourself in that vulnerable position, but look at the opportunities and frame them as challenges. How might we make the world better in a particular way? How might we achieve this? So, think about the growth opportunities rather than how to get everything back to how it was in the past. We talk a lot in the lab about, design thinking, putting customers at the absolute center of everything we do. But also inherent within that approach is experimentation and learning. So, that requires some of those behaviors we talked about earlier, where, you've got to roll with the punches, listen and learn and experiment. And that requires you to be adaptable in the way that you approach things. You're going to sometimes hear things that you didn't want to hear or you didn't necessarily expect to hear. But, a growth mindset will allow you to respond to that in a positive way. And finally, I would say curiosity. Be curious about the world. Be curious about what's going on out there, whether that's talking to end customers or talking to your team members. I would put diversity in there as well, actually. I'm a big believer in if you're discussing something and everyone in the room who you're discussing it with looks like you, there's a bit of a problem. So, make sure you put yourself in those diverse environments, get different opinions, be curious about what people have to say and their opinions about a subject. So yeah, I think a growth mindset is about, starts with your own why, self-care and yourself, but then it puts puts you in that slightly vulnerable position of responding to what you see out there and listening and looking to make things better.
Do we think there's a difference between the opportunities an individual might have with their mindset compared to how an organization may be behaving? So, you know, a core group of people in the organization all have a growth mindset, but the culture in the organization itself behaves more in a fixed space or a scarcity space. I'm curious as to if anyone here on the panel's seen that, and have you seen an organization that's been able to shift? And maybe it's because of legacy, maybe it's because of culture.
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. Yeah, I mean, I've worked in environments where I would say I'm working with a very growth mindset team in organizations that are very fixed, and it's hard. It's really hard. But that's when it comes back to those behaviors of persistence and resourcefulness and resilience to try and drive things through. I've done it enough in my career. I'm sort of of the opinion that you can't do it for too long, actually, because when there's that disconnect between your behaviors and where you want to be and push the organization and the organization itself, I think that's a very difficult place to be, and it's difficult for it to last too long, actually.
I can also, to that, and I think it's going to answer a little bit of Jess O'Donnell had a question in the Q&A here that I think speaks to this as well, and that is, I think if your personal, what kind of goes back to the personal organizational why, right? So if you go back to the analogy of that spouse, like the married couple, if they both have this vision to see their marriage grow and become solid, a much more solid unit, and even if they're family and maybe they have children, maybe their desire of the family is to become stronger, it's going to rely on the individuals to also have that same mentality. So there has to be that alignment for sure. And I would say for Jess's question about, how can we carry forward the momentum of our response over time, I think that it really is going to take that. It's going to take that desire for this future vision of what could be, this solution, whatever it might be. We may not know the solution, but the desire of having that state of interconnectedness, great response, of transparency, that has to be out there. In fact, I would even encourage people to write it out, maybe as part of the process of starting out this redesigning, this reimagining of our communities post-COVID, is to say, okay, write it out. What is the vision that you see for Calgary, for Chattanooga? And write it out. When you look at our organizations from the for-profit, nonprofit sectors to the government sector, and we say, in the best world scenario, it's 15 years down the road. What does it look like? Calgary is known, the world is coming to Calgary because everybody is seeing this great response that these different sectors all came together and are working together for the greater common good. What happened in between there? So if you put the vision out there, then sometimes you'll actually have a better opportunity to begin developing ideas and solutions to reach those.
I think that's a really good segue into this concept too of the importance of community, the importance of systems working together, and how does that sustain not only adaptability, but the adoption of what we're putting in place. And Beth, I know you have a lot of passion around systems, and I'd love to give that to you to share with our audience some thoughts around that.
One of the things that, what makes this time really important from a systems perspective is that it appears that all levels of all systems are open at the same time. And if you think about the adoption curve or the S curve in terms of systems, and to my nerdy systems friends out there, and you really want to be a panarchist and you believe in the panarchy, systems connecting to systems connecting to systems, now is the best time for you to be a panarchist in the world, because all systems are open at all levels. One of the reasons why systems change can be so difficult is because there might be a systems readiness, at the meso level of a system, but the macro system or the micro system may not be ready for that change, or conversely. But right now, all systems at all levels have a degree of openness. And that is where, you know, I get a little tingly and I go, oh, wow, okay. Let's be really clear and really focused in terms of which system we want to lean into, go after, pursue those open channels while they're open. Because if you're thinking about this from an adaptive systems perspective, you know, we're all in the back loop. You know, we're all in the back loop. We're all in that creative space right now. That is open to everybody right now at all systems levels. When you look at what governments have been doing, they have been basically recreating their entire support systems in the past 9 weeks before our eyes. Every day, something new is happening. Every day. It is possible for us to do this. It has always been possible for us to do this. And, you know, from a systems perspective, all systems are open, which means all potential is available, which means if you are ready, now is the time to go. And so to all of you who are thinking about systems out there, Patrick is absolutely right. Write down your vision. Draw out your pathway. What is your network map? Where do you need to go? What conversations do you need to have? Self-organize. This is the time when self-organization is, it's happening before our eyes. People are coming together and they're saying, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and boom, it's done. So it is very rare that you have all systems open at the same time for a period of time, generally all focused on the same set of outcomes also, which I think is also really critically important here. There's not a divergent set of outcomes here. There's a very common set of outcomes. They're very clear, they're very clearly understood. And it's the intersection of physical health, mental health, and economic health. And those systems in those circles are all open at the same time. And if you think about that as a Venn diagram, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in there. So organizations that are interested in systems change, advocating for systems change, leading systems change, writing articles for system change, building initiatives for system change, our time is now. And that's where it's really, really important to, you know, go after power structures in communities, look to build different power structures in communities, Patrick, as you're saying, you know, in your text here, you know. Yeah, people don't want to loosen their grip on power structures, but they're already loosening. And we are, right, we're seeing that in front of us. So, you know, if you want to be a part of the unloosening, go apply some elbow grease. There's absolutely nothing preventing you, because when I think about who it is, if James would say, who it is that we're trying to serve, who's the customer that we're trying to serve, the citizen we're trying to serve, the person that we're trying to serve, it is the same person, and often it is ourselves. And the one thing that we know we all are is very self-interested. So, you know, if serving myself in the service of others or vice versa is what we're all about here, we're all about that at the same time. So it sounded a little bit like Stomp and Tom there for a second, but, you know. But so I do think from a systems perspective, it's wide open. Go, hurry hard.
So how do we navigate the innovation fatigue that might start?
I don't know, Monique, like, I don't know, like maybe I just think differently. Like, do people really get tired thinking of new ideas? I don't know. That's never happened to me. You know, I've often said that the day that happens to me will be the day after I die. You know, I think that is it something that are we fatiguing? I think that if we look at this as an initiative that will make us tired, it will make us tired. But like James says, if I think about it, that this is an opportunity for us to do all the possible things that we have always held in our hearts, in our minds, how could we possibly ever get tired by the great privilege that we've been given to actually lean into this? And I do want to acknowledge that this is a privilege. This is a privileged conversation we're having here. So, you know, I do feel responsible and accountable to my privilege. And I do feel that I do not get to say that I am weary of that if I am going to benefit from that. And I put that challenge out there for sure.
James?
I don't think we'll get weary of providing great solutions for people and solving problems. I think we'll get weary by not doing a good job and not leaning in and constantly failing at a grand scale. So my opinion would be, innovation fatigue will only come if there's lots of bad innovation out there or lots of solutions in the marketplace that really don't solve the customer problems. It'll ride a wave and will be very easy for people if they think their lives getting better and their problems being solved.
And I just posted this in the chat as well. I said, I think we could get really weary, right? If I have ideas and they never get to go anywhere, and that might not be my own fault. I just don't have a pathway to bring ideas into. Then yeah, I'm going to get tired because I'm just wasting my energy. So I think as leaders, as innovation leaders, or even convening leaders, we need to provide pathways for the diverse amount of people in our community to provide ideas too, especially if it's, and I think James is absolutely correct when diverse perspectives is vital, and if you're exploring design thinking in any sort of way, it is making sure that we're looking at diverse points of view and getting our users, our community members involved in the solutions themselves. I think that's really key. So I think that's going to be really important. I think it's also making sure that we're not sort of holding on to our own positional strength and our own positional mindset, that it's not about us. Our own, I keep on saying the word own. We have to lose our ownership and allow, we were one of the most, the strongest things that I heard one day was that we were in an innovation session full of all these CEOs of various nonprofits, and we were talking about innovation. And there was a question about this, just to see if truly something were to happen for us to really affect community impact on a grand scale, what do we need to do? And someone basically just said, hey, well, I think we need to come to the table and leave all of our logos behind. And it stood out to me because a lot of these CEOs are those people who bring their logos because they want the donors to fund their own programs. But at the same time, I think it's such a wise, such wisdom behind those words, is to leave ourselves, leave our logos behind for the greater good of the society and the community at large.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that. This lens of, we all come with our own agendas. And if we're really going to lean into serving the citizens and our community, we need to put those aside. So I'm also then like to have a little bit of conversation around the importance of collaboration and partnership, and where does that fit as we're trying to think about innovating change for the humans, for all of us, and shifting in our systems. And where do those partnerships and collaborators play into this part of big change? Beth.
I was actually going to flip it to Patrick because he looked like he was nodding vigorously. He was like, yeah. And Patrick has had exactly this conversation many times before. So Patrick, why don't you lean in and then I'll jump in.
Sure. I think all of us could probably jump in here for sure. Sorry about that. I would say for us, my perspective is that collaborative efforts really speak to opportunities for people to engage with one another. So I'm a volunteer soccer coach for a high school soccer team here, and we've always said this: like the biggest success for our team as a whole is really when the least skilled player and the least experienced player has the ability to progress and to be successful, and has an ability to actually learn. And if they can get their big brothers, their other teammates who have the skills and the experience to actually invest into the development and the growth of those less experienced players, and you're going to see the whole team succeed. I would say that's the sort of case even with collaborative efforts around social impact. Is you have to recognize those organizations or those units that potentially don't have the skills and experience, and then be willing to spend time building into their capacity. I think that's really important. I also think listening to them, because there perhaps are really important ideas that sometimes those other external or outside voices have that we are just not considering. So this element of it's called, you know, sideways learning, peer-to-peer learning is so vital as well. So Beth, you want to, or James, you want to take a little leap on that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, Patrick, 100%. And the only other thing I would add is that, you know, you have to be intentional about those partnerships in their design and in their care. And that is one of the things that I've learned from Jocelyn Daw, the partnership brokers who we've been working with for the past couple of years, is you need to pay as much attention to the partnership itself as you do to the thing it is that you're trying to solve, or the problem that you're trying to solve, or the thing you're working on. And like any relationship, you have to pay attention to that relationship, know it, map it, understand its strengths, understand its weaknesses, and set aside regular time to care for the partnership, in addition to the problem that you're trying to solve together.
And I'll just say I love sports analogies. So, and I think that's a great one, Patrick, actually. I've been a coach for kids sports teams as well. And I'm a big believer in that, you know, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the team or in the partnership, as you say, Beth. So actually taking time to look after your teammates and nurture the partnership as well as nurture the, you know, yourself as a player is really important. So I love that.
Well, this is going to bring us to time, and I really wanted to thank our three guests today, Beth, James, and Patrick. You've gave a lot of information to our audience. No two change processes or problems are the same, and how everybody takes those on is very unique, not just based on mindset, but based on leadership, organizations they work for, and not everything goes as planned. I think that was a great message today. Experimenting is necessary. So I think we would say, you know, observe, adapt, test, learn, figure out what you're going to adopt, and let's make change possible. Thank you for joining us today. And if you're interested and would still like to participate in conversations with us, I hope you're interested. You can do so by engaging with us on Open City. And we also are active on Instagram, of course, LinkedIn and Facebook. Our next Innovation Table session is next week on May 27th. And we're excited about hosting part 2 of our virtual talking circle, an Indigenous perspective on the COVID-19 health crisis. And lastly, a reminder that this session was recorded. And so you'll receive a link in the next couple of days that you can share with your friends and colleagues. And please, if you enjoyed Responsible Disruption, please share it with your friends. We look forward to seeing you next week. Stay healthy, everyone.